This episode is dedicated to my father, the man who inspired me to serve, who taught me what sacrifice, discipline, and pride in the uniform truly looks like. Thank you for shaping the soldier and the person I am today. Dad, this one's for you.
Hey, hey, Lex on the record.
All right, y'all. So today's episode is one I've been so excited to tell. We're talking about a unit so courageous, so determined, so legendary that even their enemies recognize their strength. I'm talking about the Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Infantry Regiment, an all Black combat unit in World War I whose bravery went far beyond the battlefield. But this isn't just a story about war, it's a story about Black excellence, resilience, and a group of men who proved themselves again and again, even when the world tried to overlook them. And honestly, their story inspires me. These men didn't just serve, they showed what it meant to stand tall, stay committed, and make history on your own terms. So let's get into it. All right, so let's set the scene. It's 1917, and America has just entered World War I, and the country is buzzing with patriotism and recruitment posters. And Black men across the nation are stepping forward, ready to serve, ready to fight, ready to prove themselves. It honestly kind of sounds like, the Hamilton play. But before the Harlem Hellfighters ever stepped foot onto a battlefield, they were fighting another battle right here on home soil. Their training experience will set the stage for everything that comes next. So, like every other soldier, they went through basic training, but their experience was nowhere near equal. During this time, they trained in segregated camps, slept in separate barracks, and were issued old, outdated equipment that the Army just didn't want, while their white counterparts, trained with the latest weapons, had access to proper facilities, and the men of the 369 were often given hand me downs and were treated like an afterthought. And yet, they still showed up every single day. They trained hard, they built discipline, and they carried themselves with a level of pride and professionalism that demanded respect. With limited resources and a system that didn't believe in them, these soldiers were simply looking for an opportunity to prove that they were worthy. But the Army was not ready to give them that opportunity. Instead of placing them on the front lines, they were pushed into labor roles. So you're building, loading, carrying, pretty much you're doing everything except actual combat. And that's how the Harlem Hellfighters came to be. Not because the Army believed in their potential, but because they genuinely just didn't know what to do with them. But here's what I love about this unit. These men refused to be underestimated. They knew why they enlisted, so they had a purpose, right? They knew what they were capable of, and they were determined to fight for their country, whether America recognized their worth or not. Eventually, the U.S. handed them over to the French army, almost like passing off a responsibility that they honestly didn't want to manage. But the French saw something different. They saw their courage, their discipline, and their excellence. So instead of sidelining them, the French said, if you're here to fight, then fight. Gear up and let's go. Essentially, Avengers, suit up. They weren't playing with them. They said, if you're going to be here, you're going to work. And the Hellfighters became legends. Once the Harlem Hellfighters reached the front lines, everything shifted. The moment they were finally given the chance to fight, they rose to it with a level of determination that stunned everyone around them. They spent 191 consecutive days in combat. Let me say that again for the people in the back. 191 consecutive days. That is longer than any other American regiment in the entire war. Out in the trenches every day, wondering if the next hour would be their last. Yet, they kept showing up. As someone who wears a uniform today, even I can't fully wrap my mind around that kind of endurance. That's not just bravery, that's purpose. That's conviction. And people noticed. Even the enemy noticed. The German forces started calling them the Hellfighters, not as an insult, but out of just sheer respect for how fiercely these men were fighting during this time. Because no matter how intense the fighting got, these men refused to be shaken. And among them was one of the most extraordinary soldiers I've ever read about, and that is Private Henry Johnson. His courage is the kind you just don't forget. It really just sits with your spirit. So one night during a surprise attack, Johnson found himself injured. He was outnumbered and he was fighting in the dark. Then in the midst of the fighting, his rifle jammed. But he didn't stop. He grabbed whatever he had, which at the time was his service knife, and he continued defending his fellow soldiers with unwavering resolve. Because at that moment, quitting was not an option. Only protecting his men was. Listening to his story, I can't help but imagine the adrenaline, the fear, the instinct, the sheer willpower it took to keep moving when everything in you is telling you to just collapse. And yet, in that moment, he rose. France ended up honoring Henry Johnson immediately with the Croix de Guerre, which is their highest military honor. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm Southern, so my words are a little funky. America, on the other hand, made him wait nearly a century for his award. It wasn't until 2014 that he finally received the Medal of Honor he should have been given at some point during his lifetime. And as painful as that delay is, it doesn't change the truth. Henry Johnson's bravery remains one of the most remarkable acts in military history. And the fact that his story isn't taught everywhere is exactly why I'm telling it here. When the war finally ended, the Harlem Hellfighters came home to a celebration that was long overdue. I mean, before they shipped out, there was a celebration. They weren't even allowed to participate in it. So the fact that they were even getting this parade to begin with was that's just a testimony to how fierce these men were. They marched through the streets of Harlem surrounded by crowds cheering, bands playing, people waving flags, a moment that was filled with pride, joy, and the recognition they had earned with every step they took overseas. And as someone who studies history, this moment always stands out to me because parades aren't just celebrations, they're symbols, right? It's where the community gets a chance to say, like, we see you, we honor you, and we remember what you did. We recognize what you did. And honestly, it gives me chills every time I think about that. But here's the part that never gets easier to say. Outside of that celebration, not much changed. The same discrimination they faced before the war was still waiting for them. The same barriers, the same lack of opportunity, the same country that benefited from their sacrifice still refused to treat them as equals. And that is a hard pill to swallow. I mean, these men risk everything, their bodies, their futures, their lives for a nation that still wouldn't stand beside them, salute them, or even see them with the full dignity that they deserved. And honestly, as a lover of history, this is where I get frustrated because when you study the patterns, the timelines, the social structures, the way power moved in this country, you see how often Black excellence was celebrated in the moment, but it was dismissed in the long run. I mean, you see how quickly recognition can turn into silence. And I think these men stepping off ships, still wearing the uniforms they fought and bled in, only to be met with the same barriers that existed before the war. It's heartbreaking, but it's also revealing. Moments like this remind me why historical storytelling matters so much, why these stories deserve more than a chapter in a textbook. Because if we don't get the full truth, the triumph and the injustice, we miss the real lesson. And the Hellfighter story carries one of the most important lessons of all. Honor isn't just something you earn, it's something a society must be willing to give. What I find most incredible about the Harlem Hellfighters is that despite everything they faced, the discrimination, the doubt, the lack of recognition, they still managed to leave a legacy that reshaped culture, community, and military history. They didn't just serve, they excelled, and they became symbols of resilience, strength, and undeniable talent. They brought pride to Harlem and inspired future generations of Black soldiers who would follow in their footsteps. And I am proudly one of those soldiers. The Harlem Hellfighters quietly pushed the needle forward in the long fight for civil rights, simply by proving with action what they were capable of when given the chance. Their story is one of those turning points in history that doesn't always get labeled as such, but you can feel its ripple effect. You can see how their courage challenged old narratives and how their excellence created cracks in the system built to overlook them. And what I love most is that their legacy didn't fade. It just took the world a little bit of time to catch up. In 2020, more than a century after their service, the U.S. Army finally gave them the special designation they always deserved, the Harlem Hellfighters. The name they earned, the name they carry with pride, the name history will always remember. Moments like this remind me why telling these stories matters so much because recognition may come late, but truth has a way of rising. The Harlem Hellfighters, their truth is powerful. The Harlem Hellfighters story stays with me because it shows what it's like to stand in your purpose, even when the world isn't ready to recognize your worth. These men fought with a level of courage and commitment that reshaped history, whether the history books chose to say their names or not. In our upcoming episode, we'll shift from the battlefield of World War I to the heart of the civil rights movement, into the story of a young girl whose courage helped ignite a revolution, a teenager who refused to give up her seat months before Rosa Parks ever sat on that bus, a young woman whose name deserves to stand right alongside the icons we all know. Episode 3 is all about Claudette Colvin, and trust me, her story is worthy. So thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll come back as we continue uncovering the voices history tried to quiet. I'll see you next time on Lex on the Record.
Stay bold, stay kind till we meet again. This is our history, our power, our pen.